And we're live. Welcome back to Saving Democracy. Oh, there it is. Okay, there was a delay. Welcome back to the Saving Democracy show. I'm Etienne Labelle, and do we ever have a show today with some new revelations? Welcome back to the Saving Democracy show. I'm Etienne. Okay, there's an echo. Oh, here it is. Okay. So as you can see from the topics to be covered list over there, here, not there, we will be talking about strategies. It's funny to have like a double here. It's like, who is that over there? We will cover strategies for more constructive discussions. Because I hear that all the time is, I'm trying to talk about this stuff to my friends or my family or my girlfriend, and it's just not happening. So we'll go through some concrete strategies, then go over my 3 crucial unanswered questions to Health Canada and MPs and their non-responses. And then we'll look into this question of controlled opposition and whether the freedom movement has been infiltrated by controlled opposition. And so we'll look through the evidence and try to determine to what extent this may be happening, as a way to derail, of course, the organic, any kind of organic freedom movement. Quick Emergencies Act update, and then follow up on Alberta, Alberta's new Premier Daniel Smith, and question marks there. And also at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, or 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I will appear on Jason Lavigne's live stream coverage of the Emergencies Act. As I mentioned last time, we are collaborating, and if all goes well, I will join his show, which is potentially technologically a challenge, because I'm going to try to join his live stream while live streaming my live stream, and had to attach a second camera to make that possible. But if we have any problems, we will try again next week. All right. So, and again, questions, comments, do not hesitate to speak your mind. No question is a dumb question. Think back. And think back about your days in school, in university, college. Even a stupid question is not a stupid question, because it could be useful to other people who may have had the same question or similar question. And sometimes even answering a stupid question can shed new light on the topic. So, strategies for more constructive discussions. I could even pull up some of the resources I was using to get some of these strategies, but they're also more broadly just from my background in social psychology, where I spent a lot of time thinking about social influence, persuasion, personalized marketing, personalized persuasion techniques. And in general, the first thing you want to do is, even here, I kind of want a whiteboard. It'd be cool if I could have a whiteboard where I could just be writing this down, kind of like a lecture. Communicate that you're on the same team. I don't know if I want to be. Oh yeah, and the typing is making a lot of noise, so we won't do that. So the first strategy is either before you start talking or when you start feeling like things are getting heated or that voices are being raised. Excuse me. Is you want to communicate to the other person that you're on the same team. You're both on the same team of maybe humanity, like you're both humans. You want you have their best interest in mind, and that helps to prevent things from de-escalating, where it becomes more of a battle of egos, or I'm right, you're wrong type of dysfunctional communications. So find a common team that you're both on, or maybe it's the same country, same enlightenment values. Just find something in common that you can communicate you're on the same team. And then I think probably this is one of the most effective, is to find common ground. So if you start seeing things escalate and you realize the other person's pretty far in terms of latitude of acceptance from maybe your position, so you want to take, and this is hard to do in the moment, right? You have to, while you're in a social interaction, and this is why some people are more skilled at it than others, but again, social skills you can practice. Practice makes perfect. Is you have to start thinking, okay, how can we find common ground? And once you find common ground over here, then you can start going back to your disagreement. Excuse me. Oh, more spam. This is really need to find a solution to this. Like, you think Restream? Shout out to Restream, but this is a problem. And yeah, maybe you won't be able to move the person all the way, but at least you can then establish, okay, here's our common ground. We disagree on this point, but let's see where does our disagreement, or where does our agreement end, and where does our disagreement begin, right? Another strategy is to remind the person that you're debating ideas. So two people are debating ideas separate from the people that are talking about those ideas, and separate from the people who may or may not have a position on those ideas. And again, this is difficult because, of course, there's a natural tendency to say, well, you're espousing these facts, therefore you probably have this position. Right? But if you kind of step back and say, well, there are these ideas, there's these claims, there's these concerns, and I'm going to go over evidence and arguments in support of those positions, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this show as well. Of course, I have my expertise, I have my special technical skills that allow me to have informed opinions, but really, my job is more to present all the information and let you decide for yourself what your position is. And so it becomes more about justifying your position based on reviewing the totality of credible evidence. Excuse me. And the last strategy, so this is the fourth strategy, is what along the same lines of, like, you can, beyond just trying to do that, you can actually communicate that during a discussion with someone else or in a group, and explicitly mention that you're just trying to justify having certain positions based on a careful review of the arguments and evidence, rather than debating whether your own personal position is valid or not. Right? So, well, I mean, you could use almost any example. You can use the example that we're going to talk about today, like the COVID vaccines. I mean, you should be able to discuss concerns about the COVID vaccine safety and say, well, I have those concerns based on X, Y, Z evidence that are right here. They're right here. Right? And so if you carefully look at this evidence, a person, anyone, any reasonable, logical person should be able to look at this evidence and then arrive and say, this evidence justifies someone's position to be concerned about the COVID vaccine safety, right? And so whether I believe it or not is irrelevant and or a secondary point that, as I mentioned in the first show, I believe that it's, maybe you should mention it as a bias. But in the end, there should be a common goal to get to the truth and to get to the best approximation of the truth. So, quick recap on 4 strategies to use when discussing any ideas, but particularly polarizing ideas like gun control and abortion. 1 is, again, communicate that you're on the same team. 2, try to find, when things get heated, try to pivot and find common ground. And then once you've found common ground, then move towards finding where the disagreement begins so that you get a more constructive discussion. And then you can come back and say, okay, let's continue this discussion another day. Number 3, remind the person that you're debating ideas separate from the person to avoid things getting personalized. And then 4, actually stating that the evidence would lead someone to have this position, or it's about how do you justify your position on certain issues rather than your own personal opinion. And that will also keep it more or less personal. Okay, I need to clean up this garbage. It seems to be actually coming from YouTube. But in YouTube, it's not there. Oh, dear. Let's just refresh. Okay, well, that's a mystery to me. Okay, so that's, and again, let me know if there's other, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We could go into even more depth and use better examples. Oh yeah, I could do a quick example with the gun control. I forget if I mentioned that last time. Too many discussions with too many people. But for gun control, so we had an example. This comes from personal experience where we had a neighbor. We were just discussing this segment. I could play it, but I don't think it's needed. Where Trudeau was saying that in Canada, guns can only be legally used for hunting and target shooting, not self-defense. And that this idea of using guns for self-defense is actually not in the Constitution, and it's coming from the U.S. and this right-wing extremist websites. And the neighbor got really kind of heated. Again, you could tell in his voice. And but then me and the other neighbor, who are more on the, I guess, libertarian side of things, I just started trying to debate and we were trying to come up with examples like, well, what about a single mom? And he was just getting more heated. So then we just kind of pivoted. But that was kind of the trying to find common ground. I thought, okay, let's use a single mom with children at home, and there's an intruder as a way to find common ground. And even that didn't work, right? So then it was just, okay, exit strategy, right? But in retrospect, another attempt could have been, well, let's go with the same scenario, but this time the single mom reaches for the biggest kitchen knife, right? So can we both agree that that'd be acceptable, right? It'd be acceptable for a single mom with 3 children, there's an intruder at the door, it'd be acceptable for her to use the biggest knife in the kitchen as self-defense, right? And I think it would have been pretty hard for him to disagree with that. And if he does disagree with that, well, okay, then definitely just change topics. But then if he agrees with that, well, now you have some common ground from which to explore, okay, well, now that we have common ground on, okay, kitchen knives should be allowed as reasonable, justified weapons for self-defense. So where does our disagreement begin? So we found agreement on a common ground. Now let's explore the space and see where the disagreement begins, and to keep it a more constructive discussion. So it covers that topic for now. So I guess we'll go to the next topic. Whoops. Which is my 3 crucial. I should be and this this is the diagram I'll be discussing. Where is my mouse? Holy moly, the mouse is on the loose. And this is on Jason Lavigne's show, I'll give a brief background of my science watchdog work and science whistleblowing work, but then focus mostly on this this chart, which again it's the 17 key stories that we're covering in relation, mapped onto the 6 most basic human rights, or 6 most basic fundamental freedoms that make life meaningful, right? Bodily autonomy, freedom of expression, democratic and legal rights, freedom of assembly and religion, freedom of mobility, and life, liberty, and security, right? Because again, there's thousands of stories and scandals going on. We don't have that time or resources, but even if we did, these are still the stories you'd want to focus on. 17 stories that seem to violate those fundamental freedoms. And then, of course, some of them we will try to actively investigate at a deeper level with the help of lawyers and other independent journalists. Though, admittedly, these are daunting, ambitious tasks. And to be honest, Tuesday, I mean, this this graph is, it's, because again, these issues, there's 17 stories, but each one of these stories is scandalous and dark on their own rights. But when you combine them in a chart like this, it's just, man, I had to take a break and play some piano last time, because it's almost like by explaining it for the live stream, it got me in this strange mindset. And then Yeah. And so now it reinforces the idea that we want to make this live stream more lighthearted and maybe more comedic. And so one possibility is to move the live stream to the afternoon so that it's better time for the Eastern crowd, which might be the largest contingency, and then it still fits with the European time. And then maybe it could be more informal. Maybe you could have, afternoon drinks, maybe more music, and maybe turn this into more shock jock, lighthearted shock jock / live music of, let's relieve some steam, if you will. Because, we wanted to calibrate our expectations. Of course, I am a crazy, what was the fan mail? Savant madness. I have some savant madness and craziness. But you still want to be chasing feasible goals, right? Because if you're chasing goals that are beyond your control, then, you will just kind of burn yourself out. So, and this is where, my strength, and we don't really have the resources to work with lawyers that much. So is it really feasible? And maybe my strength is more about the social psychology of, again, how to have debates, how to have discussions with family and friends, how to cope with all this negativity, how to have like a good balance between being an informed citizen that is aware of all of these democratic, aware of the erosion of our democratic rights while still remaining sane. Because it is true that you can get down a bit too deep into the weeds. So those are some of the new revelations. And we'll make a decision, and we'll probably send an email Sunday night to give people a heads up that we might, that whether or not we move the time and or format of the show. So as a reminder for, I guess the first and probably, the first 2 points. Again, these first two categories are the most fundamental of the fundamental categories, and then these two, the COVID vaccine safety evidence problems, and worse, the mandatory COVID vaccination for employment and general participation in society. Those are the main two active stories. And remember from last time, let's see if I can zoom in even more, that the current action is that I submitted my evidence to Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada to investigate into these safety signals. And that included 3 crucial questions. So we'll go through that. But as a reminder, so this is the main chart. And again, so the y-axis is the number of serious medical issues following COVID vaccination per 100,000 vaccine doses, right? Which gets around the crucial problem of, the COVID vaccine has been administered more than any other vaccine in Canadian history, so you need to control for that. And as a concrete example, so like 16 here would mean that basically like 16 people are going to the hospital after their vaccination out of 100,000 people immunized. And so the main result is that, prior to COVID, all these other vaccines had serious side effects rates of either 0.2, 0.3, and this is the provincial data. Somehow the Canadian data is a bit higher, but still only about 1 per 100,000. Whereas the COVID vaccines are 3, 4, 5, up to 15 here. So on an average of about 3 to 16 times elevated risk of serious medical issues following COVID vaccination compared to all other vaccines before. And this is from 2021, but the data is still the same, if not worse, with the myocarditis and pericarditis. So I basically sent this evidence, and I sent the interactive, interactive versions that actually have the links where you click on the links and you actually get the data, or you get the, where is this coming from? See? And let's bring up the, I should have saved this. Where is, okay, here it is. Well, it'd be better to show. Alright, move this. Damn it. I don't want to put my email tab in there. That's a bit dangerous. Okay. Sorry for the delay, folks. This is where I need an assistant. Let's see. Let's see if that works. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, play the Jeopardy song. Ah. Why does this not work? Gmail. Okay. Jesus. Okay, let's print the PDF. I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. This is a lot of fun. So much fun. Okay, sorry for the delay. So this was my email, September 2021. Dear Public Health Servant, I've discovered what appears to be concerning safety issues with COVID vaccines based on your own government's own historical data, federal and provincial. See attached info chart below or interactive chart version. I have specific expertise in evaluating scientific evidence. I've repeatedly contacted Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Health Ontario, and have not heard back as an author of previous vaccine safety annual reports or member of Nazi Health Canada. I was hoping you could help me answer 3 burning questions regarding safety issues with COVID vaccines. For example, help me locate the currently missing annual vaccine safety reports. Please let me know at your earliest convenience. Thank you. So again, this is, I specifically communicated my expertise, a PhD, my website, published author, and repeatedly contacted Health Canada, PHAC, POHO, and and because I had sent this to PHAC, Public Health Agency of Canada, probably a few weeks before or even late August. And then I decided, okay, so it's not like I just emailed one person and, I didn't hear back. No. Like I literally emailed dozens and dozens, if not like 50 people. And then I was trying to find, okay, who else could I email? Like, who else is going to respond? And so what I had found is when I was creating this chart, this one, to get these numbers here, these numbers were coming from these annual reports. Like this one. See, annual vaccine safety for Ontario 2019, all vaccines, right? So, and these were kind of some of the worst ones. But again, this is not serious side effects. So I was able to find, okay, who authored these reports. So not that one, but there's other ones. Yeah, like this one. So some of these actually had author names. Yeah, right here. So I literally found their email address and emailed any author of these previous annual vaccine safety reports, thinking, well, those people might be interested in knowing this. And we can get to why maybe they're not concerned for ideological reasons. And still, basically no response. So none, like 0 out of 20. The only thing I got, as we'll see, was kind of this template email 6 months later, right? Like in January. So I guess this was the original email I'd sent. Dear Health Canada, you tell us COVID vaccines are safe because they've been tested in rigorous clinical trials that meet rigorous standards and thoroughly and independently reviewed for safety and efficacy. That's pretty compelling words. And this is what, that was their main pitch to the public, right? But then I say, does this look like a vaccine that is safe? Clickable chart, and then laid out the 3 key observations. 3 to 10 times elevated levels of serious medical issues than all previous vaccines historically, 2 to 7 times riskier than even the worst performing vaccines historically. And then historically tracked vaccine safety information is being obscured, hidden from the public. How can a vaccine that's been thoroughly and independently reviewed for meeting very high vaccine safety standards be performing this badly? These are the 3 burning questions. 1, why are COVID vaccines still being used given they're at least 10 times less safe than all other vaccines historically, even compared to the worst vaccines? And crucially, number 2, how much worse does it need to get before the use of COVID vaccines are paused or halted? And in epidemiology, they call that a stop condition. So they're supposed to have a stop condition. And this is the same with any medical experiments. You have to actually lay out what kind of bad outcomes, if they happen, we stop the trial or we stop the vaccine rollout, like they did in some European countries for certain age groups. And they keep just raising. So Denmark and the Netherlands, I think at first they said, okay, no more COVID vaccines for under 20 because of the heart inflammation problems. Oh, actually, no, we're going to stop for under 30, actually under 40. So now I think Denmark, they literally canceled or temporarily halted the COVID vaccine rollout program for anyone under 40. Whereas Canada is just, they paused the AstraZeneca and then unpaused it or flip-flopped. Okay, and lastly, number 3, where are the current annual vaccine safety reports for all vaccines in Ontario, which appear missing since 2020? And literally, I wonder if this is still up. They literally have this message. Due to the COVID pandemic, annual side effects data cleaning activities were reduced in scope. Ah, yes. How convenient. Oh, here it is. So this, yeah, I wish I could show the, yeah, you can see the URL. See, publichealthontario.ca. I can include the links in the video description. So it's not it's not a obscure site. This is the real deal, the real government website. Vaccine safety surveillance tool, right? And it's showing you the number of side effects reported across all vaccines across time. See, this is 2012, 2019. It's pretty flat. I mean, there's a slight increase, but that statistically would most likely not be significant. And then right here you go. Literally, I couldn't believe my eyes when I read this. Due to the COVID pandemic, annual side effects data cleaning activities were reduced in scope. Therefore, comparisons across years should be interpreted with caution, particularly for 2019. Oh, wow. And so again, that was my third question. What happened? Why are you not tracking this anymore on this specific page? But then, where are these other annual reports? So these annual reports, again, they had these. See, this is serious side effects from the annual report 2012, 2013, 2014. I mean, they're all there, right? But then magically, after 2019, they're gone. Couldn't find them. Can't find anyone that can point to them. So again, maybe there's a boring explanation for that. You don't want to jump to conclusion, but again, combining this with all this other stuff, it paints a pretty dark picture. Oh yeah. Okay, so that was my email. Same issue for Canada, whereby current federal vac safety reports also appear to be missing since 2019, or have they been moved? So again, you can show I'm not some crank, right? Who's just cherry picking something that's not a real problem here. Right, I'm trying to be careful, and I'm even showing that in my email, or they've been moved, question mark, like that's showing, like I'm not attacking them and making huge assumptions and presumptions. And then I just finish. All Canadians urgently deserve thorough answers and explanations to these 3 pressing questions, particularly urgent given that Canadians are currently being pressured to get the COVID vaccination to be able to participate in society. Sincerely, concerned father, scientist, and citizen. And so you can see I sent it to all these people September 27th, and then reminder emails October 19th, and on and on and on and on. I'm not sure why that's there. So, and then I also sent it some MPs and either got no response or the template message saying we will look into this and hopefully get back to you. No real actions. And then finally, again, the same problem. Sharing email, you gotta be careful. And this is live streaming, it's going public. Okay, so their response from the Public Health Agency of Canada is as follows. And look at this, January 4th. On behalf, Mr. LaBelle, on behalf of Dr. Stephen Lucas, Deputy Minister of Health Canada, I wish to thank you for your letters of September 27th and October 19th concerning the safety of COVID vaccines. I sincerely regret the delay in responding. And he would be the person, among many others, who should be held responsible, held accountable. So if and when we actually file ethics complaint violations, it would be against him and others. And this is template, like this is a template message. As you can tell by the different font size, these people are that lazy or incompetent. And just these platitudes of Health Canada and PHAC are committed to helping protect, maintain, and improve the health of Canadians. Vaccination is an important public health measure that prevents disease disability. The safety of our vaccines is of utmost importance to the government of Canada. Oh, really? And Canada has a robust and well-established vaccine safety surveillance system. Oh, yes. It's so robust. It's so robust that you just stop tracking stuff after 2019. Right. It's really robust. It's quite a robust surveillance system you have there. Anyways, I'm not going to read all this. I mean, maybe I should. Health Canada's independent drug authorization process is recognized around the world for its high standards and rigorous review. And that's not true. Yeah, there's even, as I review in this video, which is on our YouTube channel, I actually review Vanessa's law. Where is it? It is. Oh, here it is. See, Health Canada still allows drug companies to redact key information from drug approval filings. He was a Conservative MP whose daughter died from a bad heart medication. Oh no, a stomach medication. No, it was a stomach medication that compromised his daughter's heart, and she died, and he sued, and they did pull the drug from the market. And then it took 10 years to raise transparency standards for drug companies in their submitting evidence. But then within a couple of years, the pharmaceutical lobby groups returned or regressed the law back in their favor. Right. Failure to enforce Vanessa's law is a deadly game. Hiding patient-level clinical trial data is comparable to hiding from investigators the mechanical records of a commercial jet that crashed. No sane person would help airlines keep them secret. And this is exactly what pharmaceutical companies do. When they submit their evidence, they are allowed to not share patient-level clinical trial data. That means like the actual data that you would need to reanalyze the data to make sure that their claims. So this is what this is what the evidence looked like that they submit to the government. And it's just not enough. It's just not enough data to really carefully examine it, replicate the results. So this is false. Decisions are based only on scientific and medical evidence showing that vaccines are safe and effective. Continually monitors. It will not hesitate to take appropriate action. Yeah, right. This could include warning. Yeah, and they have added side effects to their regular reports. But they still haven't focused on the fact that it's 10 times more dangerous. Where is it? So yeah, in these reports, those are going to be the web archive. So they were, was it every week? Yeah, weekly surveillance. So they would, and they are, these 27-page. Oh yeah, here's a myocarditis, pericarditis. So you could see per million doses how many people are getting harmed, potentially getting harmed. Again, we have to be careful. So, but with young people, like of course, if you take a vaccine, then you have health problems. It's correlational. So you have to be very careful, especially when you're talking about older people, because there could be other causes of the medical problem, even though the problem only occurred right after the vaccination. But for younger people, it's a lot less likely that something else caused the problem, right? So that's why if you want to focus on the most compelling evidence, you'd focus on these younger people. Because the chance of a young, healthy person experiencing heart problems it does happen, but it's very, very rare. So yeah, they keep pumping out these reports, but as other people have pointed out, they've changed the kind of the criteria, and that gets to kind of another kind of crazy dark dungeons. Is that the people? Oh yeah, you can see right here. So there's been claims that these are underestimates because they use this Brighton collaboration case definition for meeting. Basically, if it doesn't meet that seriousness, then it's excluded from this table. But as others pointed out, I mean, there's no, like, if you have there's no mild case of myocarditis and pericarditis, especially in young people. And there's claims that Brighton Collaboration used to be a nonprofit that was then kind of bought out by the Bill and Gates Foundation, or ties to Bill and Gates Foundation, and all kinds of other conflicts of interest in terms of basically raising the requirements for declaring something a side effect. And so again, it's very nuanced. It's not like they're just not producing these reports at all, but they're producing reports that are at best kind of biased and written in a way to make people less concerned. A bit kind of like the death data. So it's, they had all this info everywhere, and all this info. But to a layperson, to the average person, they're just like, well, okay, boring. Okay, death, yeah. Coronavirus is super deadly to everyone, right? Whereas if you think a bit more carefully, like we reviewed previously, you can conclude a much more nuanced and tempered judgment that this is not a killer virus to everyone. So it's kind of similar. It's just presenting stuff in a way to obfuscate and to de-emphasize. So you're just kind of misleading, which is, again, what we were trained as PhD students. We were trained to mischaracterize our evidence, to spin it, and to sell the sizzle, not the steak. And so we were basically taught how to oversell our evidence. And this is what the government's doing. Overselling and mischaracterizing the evidence, somehow in deference to the pharmaceutical companies. But again, the government should work, it's supposed to work for the people and our interests, not the interests of pharmaceutical companies. This could include warning Canadians, changing the recommended use of the product, or even removing the product from market. Right. Which is what people have called for, and this has not happened. And then the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, external advisory, provides independent expert advice. But again, as we could review, this external advisory body is not that independent, and the experts are all coming from mainstream established laptop class of universities. Again, this is my expertise of knowing that these professors have all this left-leaning establishment biases, political correctness, low scientific standards, no data sharing. So yeah, they're experts, but there's not enough viewpoint diversity. There's not enough diversity in perspectives. And provides independent expert advice to the Public Health Agency of Canada on the optimal use of vaccines. Optimal for what? Oh, yeah, right. Considers the risks for population subgroups, such as younger people. Again, this can't be further from the truth. Again, if you had done a careful risk-benefit analysis for younger people, you would have never recommended COVID vaccination, where the risks from the COVID vaccine are way higher than the risk of the virus, which again, to young people, the flu appears to be more dangerous than the coronavirus. Thankfully. I mean, that's a good thing. Blah, blah, blah. So again, either just template responses, empty promises, are committed to provide accurate information on the safety of, transparent, timely matters. Opposite, you're obfuscating, hiding. Yeah, these are all the things I use. These reports are what I use to create this graph. So again, why did you not respond to my 3 questions of how do you explain this 10 times elevated signal, and at what signal and how much worse does it need to get to stop the rollout? Didn't answer that question. And third, also didn't ask, he's talking about transparency, but when I ask, well, where did all these other vaccine reports go? No answer. So that's that. Pretty dark. But again, this is where my opinion takes on a bit more weight when it's like, I'm not just a keyboard activist that just likes to complain. No, I took action. It took literally a month of my time to create this graph and dig into the details because I wanted to see for myself, is it really true? Because again, you can't just look at anecdotal evidence. Though there were growing anecdotal evidence that people were being harmed, though there seemed to be also a weird hush, like, ooh. So in one case, I have a first cousin who, almost just slightly older than me, experienced serious heart problem after her second, within a week of the second injection, and she, like many others, was shocked at how they were not even considering the COVID vaccine as a possible cause, and trying to dissuade her and even other people, which is very strange. But it kind of makes sense again when there's been so much fear conditioning to fear the virus, and then this propaganda of, oh, the COVID vaccine is our only way out of this, right? So that's why there's motivation to ignore the possibility that COVID vaccines are more harmful than beneficial because they've been framed as our only hope, right? And because people are so sick and tired at the time of all these lockdowns and disruption of their lives, naturally they're like, well, this is apparently the only thing we can do to help. So I'm going to, sacrifice myself for the greater good. But again, I support the greater good, but only if it actually is the greater good. So for example, this is again, social psychology 101, overgrazing. So if there's a common field that farmers are sharing and there's a social norm, or there's the reality of if too many cows are grazing the same field, you're going to overgraze, ruin the whole field for everyone. That's called the tragedy of the commons. So of course, it's in the best interest of those farmers to not selfishly put too many cows on the land, because then if everyone does that, it ruins it for everyone, right? So I'd be okay with contributing to a collective solution if that collective solution actually does end up benefiting more people than harming people, and it actually has to be beneficial for me personally. So again, like the oxygen mask, we should care about our neighbors and our community, but you need to consider your own safety before trying to save other people. So this whole idea that focusing on your individual liberties is selfish is, again, it's not just false, it's actually the opposite. Because I'm caring about my individual liberties, which also protects you, and I'm protecting everyone's individual liberties, including people who are spewing things that I don't like, right? So by protecting individual liberties, you're protecting everyone's individual liberties, and even you're giving people the right to disagree with you and to go out in the street and spew misinformation. That's still better than having a powerful government with a track record of abusing their power. It's still better to have free speech, which includes unsavory things once in a while. That's still better than having the government decide arbitrarily or in a completely biased way, decide what is information and misinformation, as we'll see with the hate speech laws. It's pretty dark. Okay, so that covers that one. I think I need a quick break, and then we'll get into controlled opposition. Be right back.
possible threat to national security. That was clearly defined in the Hendon report. So it is impossible to separate all of these events and say, I'm going to deal with this one in isolation, and when I'm done this one, I'm then going to move to the next. It couldn't be managed that way. And if you look at the evolving increase in police resources in Ottawa at the time, during that same time period, the 12th to the 14th of February, I think you will find that the number of OPP resources in Ottawa almost doubled during that time period. So it wasn't as if attention was taken away from any one particular event. This all had to be managed as a multi-jurisdictional event happening concurrently, all connected to each other. And whether there's evidence to prove that they were connected, that is irrelevant at that stage. This is about a strategy that ensures we can mitigate the risks that were before us as a province and as a country. And that needed to be done in a strategic way.
Okay. You mentioned the February 7th Hendon report, which I think the language is potential national
threat.
Security threat. The next day's Hendon report said potential threat to Canada's sovereignty and national security. Those are the only two times that phrase appears in the Hendon reports.
Well, you may want to go to the 19th of February, which I believe there's similar language around that. And with your indulgence, Commissioner, I think it is important to talk about the terminology. When we say potential threat, the term threat in a strategic intelligence report is to indicate something could happen. This is not about establishing a threshold as defined in the CSIS Act under Section 2, and not even defining the threshold of reasonable grounds to pursue charges as terrorist activity. This is talking from a strategic level. What are the risks that need to be taken into consideration when making decisions and developing plans? So the word potential is almost immaterial. It's like saying there's a threat of rain today. Does it change the situation when you say there's a potential threat of rain today? I would suggest to you it does not. What is required is further analysis of that threat. And Hendon and POIB did have those conversations with the appropriate security partners, CSIS, as well as INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, to see if that potential threat rose to the point that would warrant them enacting their mandates for the items that they're responsible for. And in the, as we know, as in the CSIS Act, it says the security of Canada. It doesn't actually say national security. Public Safety Canada goes to a much broader context when describing national security. And one of the items in national security, if you look at the national security strategy and how it's described by Public Safety Canada, actually includes impact to economy, activities at critical infrastructures, international border crossings. So as you can see, it's a very complex situation that requires detailed analysis.
But I take it you're aware that once the February 7th Hendon report was published using the phrase potential threat to national security, CSIS and INSET contacted Superintendent Morris and were concerned with the use of that phrasing and that language in the Hendon reports.
I'm not aware of who contacted who, but I certainly was assured that those conversations took place. And I think Superintendent Morris did a very eloquent job of explaining the intention of the Hendon reports. He is the foremost subject matter expert in this province as it relates to intelligence. And I would have hoped that he would have described to the Commission that those reports were for strategic purposes, for decision making and planning. And those references to possible threats to national security, I would suggest to any police leader, ought to be taken extremely seriously.
Okay. And I think the superintendent's evidence was that there were no threats that materialized, and it said there were no credible threats to national security. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And that's a very important part and piece, is that when you move from strategic intelligence into operational and tactical intelligence and establishing thresholds for mandates and thresholds for charges, that further analysis needs to be done to determine whether it's credible and whether that threat actually came to fruition.
Okay. And just so I understand, based on your testimony just now, when the Hendon reports use the phrase national security, are you saying economic security is part of that, like that's bound up in national security?
I would say that economic security forms a part of that from a strategic thinking standpoint. Again, I don't want any confusion over threat to the security of Canada as it relates to the CSIS Act. We're talking about a strategic approach to overall national security, transportation, critical infrastructure, border crossings, economic security, all of those things, cybersecurity, all of those components encompass a multifaceted approach to national security and are identified by Public Safety Canada as being important to national security.
Okay. I want to go back to Windsor now and just make sure I understand it. Did you ever receive a direction from the Deputy Solicitor General's office that Windsor ought to be prioritized as a result of its economic importance?
Absolutely not, never.
Okay. But it's fair to say that the OPP did prioritize it in part, as you've told us, due to its economic importance.
In part, I think I provided a very detailed description into all of the factors that needed to be considered and how that was identified as an operational priority, not at the expense or at the cost of other operations that were maintained and enhanced simultaneously while we were dealing with Windsor.
Okay. You say not at the cost. Again, just returning to Deputy Solicitor General Di Tommaso, and I will say he sort of speculated, but it was his opinion that Ottawa might have been cleared sooner had Windsor not been prioritized, essentially. Would you agree with that assessment?
No, I would not. What I would say is that Ottawa may have been cleared sooner had we not had to deal with the blockades in Windsor, had we not had to deal with the protest in Toronto, the blockage on the 402, the blockage at Cornwall, and the attempts to block the Peace Bridge in Niagara.
How is this?
That may have allowed Ottawa to be
Sounds pretty boring.
If there was a plan in place.
Maybe we can give a quick update here before going to controlled opposition.
Was not in place and was not ready to go on February the 12th.
So Thomas, OPP Commissioner. Okay. So this is Thomas Carrick,
that is a safe and viable
OPP
plan
Commissioner,
and we were done in Windsor,
being examined
with positive action at that point. We were in a maintenance
by
phase,
some
and
kind of
all
lawyer.
roads were opened up, I believe, on February the 14th.
Let's see
So
this
I
other
don't think
stream.
that is a fair assessment as you have opened up, I believe.
No, it doesn't say.
Is it fair to say that resources went from Windsor to Ottawa to action the plan in Ottawa once Windsor was cleared?
That would be fair to say, and just for a point of clarity, I can't say that specifically Tom Carrick went from Windsor to Ottawa. What I can say is I know that there were some public order assets that
well, we'll just read a few comments.
Windsor were able to reposition to Ottawa, but I can't commit to you that level of detail that specific people moved from Windsor to Ottawa.
I understand.
So Donald Best says potential threat does not equal actual national threat necessary to meet the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act. Potential does not define the threshold.
These are not your notes. These are
okay. Thank you.
So that was mentioned, I guess, in the cross examination.
It's hard to tell if it's 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock.
This has need.
It says call with Commissioner Carrick, OPP.
superb witness. This has been a superb. Okay. This was an excellent answer. The only finger pointing he was doing is pointing at the lack of a legal plan. There just was none.
No, I don't know what that would refer to, being in removal.
Yeah, and again, it's really unclear.
We don't,
Like, it
we don't
just seems like the evidence
operations
becomes more and more
commence or
clear
as it
that
relates to public order activity until
there's
the
no
12th
concrete
February,
evidence
I believe,
of national
having that
security
information in front of me,
issue,
but
of
my
actual
recollection of it
violence,
is the
bodily
12th of
harm to
February.
any politician,
And that is accurate.
a lot of infighting, big egos. There's even more damning evidence. Several of the evidence that several of these big shots
There was a direction.
even said at the time that not all other options were considered, which again is really crucial because the Emergencies Act specifies you can only invoke the Emergencies Act, the War Measures Act, martial law, if you've considered all other options and failed. So that's also very damning. And the other point that they actually had negotiations and had some kind of agreement to start leaving, that somehow was just ignored, like the day before, the 13th. So I think we'll just mute it. So it'll be really interesting. Again, it's almost like they're purposefully. It's like a TV reality show. Like they're purposefully. Again, I'm not. I'm not insinuating there's like a master controller. But again, there's different ways for the government. Again, just through how they decided who was part of the commission, the commissioner, the actual judge, the witness list, the order of the witness list. Again, like anytime there's an official protocol, and this is again from my background in science, I know that on the surface something can sound really official and ooh, it's peer reviewed and it's been peer reviewed and copy edited and the editor and this and that, but the truth is in the details. And so there'd be ways we'd have to look at the Inquiry Act and read hundreds of pages of boring legalese to realize that they still have some leeway that they can bias an inquiry into a direction that would be more beneficial to them and their interests rather than the interests of Canadians. And because but either way, I'm saying either way, this is a huge mystery because this is day 11 of 60. So we're only 1/6 of the way. But it seems like, it's a TV reality show moment where you're thinking, man, there's more and more damning evidence coming out against the government. How are they going to be able to get out of this one? Right? And so that makes you want to watch even more. Right? And then maybe they're doing other things in the background. Like we'll see with controlled opposition, that there's all like, oh yeah, and this is what I could show. So like a lot of people probably do realize, there's a website where you can actually look at all of the different legislation being passed or being considered. So this is the current Parliament, and of course you have the House of Commons, where the elected officials debate these new bills, and then you have the Senate, which is what's considered the sober second thought. And before any bill or legislation is actually officially passed or given royal assent, they have to pass through the Senate, which tend to be older individuals that are supposed to be wiser. Though, of course, again, there's these backdoor ordering councils, which we will cover, where they can avoid this all careful analysis, careful study And to this day, I mean, these things are being passed. So you can see first reading, third reading. So this one you can see is almost ready to be passed officially. Something about Employment Insurance Act, Employment Insurance Regulations, PEI. Super boring. But again, you have to keep in mind, like, whenever you just, CBC, here's the mainstream, here's the scandal, here's this drama in the House of Commons. You have to try to think, well, what else is going on? And in my bulletproof version of democracy, I mean, this is a pretty good website. I mean, I have to give credit where credit's due, but there's still be ways. So, well, actually, and here I can connect. So when I'm making these claims that freedom of expression is being stifled, of course not just because of freezing of bank account of Freedom Convoy donors, but I'm making claims with respect to specific bills like C-36, C-229. Well, this is where you can literally, find it in the list here, or just search for it. Oh yeah, and S means it came from the Senate. They either originated from the Senate or private member's bill. That's funny. Oh, maybe it's changed. C-229. Okay, so here's an example. So it'll tell you, okay, where did it come from, current status. So this is an act to amend the criminal code banning symbols of hate. So you go to that page and it'll show you, okay, so this tells you, okay, they've started reading the bill, but it's only first reading. So, that would still take, it usually takes months and months. Well, sometimes if they're quick, they can do it within a couple of weeks. But they're debating, as you can tell, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on, right? And so it usually takes weeks and weeks and months, and it still has to go through the Senate. But this is part of connecting the dots, because if you're trying to interpret, okay, why is the government doing these things now? It's good to know what legislation they're passing or in the pipeline, which will come into effect next year or the year before. But my feedback suggestion, so you can click text of the bill, and that brings you to the actual content of the bill, right? And it's got a summary, a preamble, but it's still very legalese. This enactment amends the criminal code to broaden the provisions related to hate propaganda by making it an offense to publicly display visual representations that promote or incite hatred or violence against an identifiable group. Wow, that sounds just slimy. Right, but again, the way it's presented, I mean, there's a summary, but I would just think, again, if you want more people to engage with this content, you need to make it more accessible, in terms of simplifying it and making it maybe more icons, more visual charts. It's all very text and still stuck in like the printing press age, right? Yeah, and again, as we're going to go through, like, what's the motivation? Again, we've always had hate speech. We've always had fringe people with really dark ideas. But why do we need to censor that? Right? If you try to censor this stuff, it's going to fester underground, and it's going to grow. Because these people now think, oh, the government's trying to censor us. We must be onto some amazing ideas, right? When in fact, it's the opposite. So by So they're going to make it harder, again, to have debates with these people and to have open debates where we can shame them. You can say, okay, you're a KKK. Come on. Like, this is, pardon my French, but this is retarded, right? But if you censor it, then you make it harder for intellectuals like me and groups like us to debate these people and to shame them, right? And again, the free marketplace of ideas, the collision of ideas, the ideas with merit survive scrutiny and bubble to the top. The ideas that don't survive scrutiny are buried. They do not survive scrutiny, right? So this is really curious that they would be that motivated to prevent the display of like Nazi swastikas, KKK insignia, because again, there's many different reasons. There's many different reasons to expose that. Maybe you're just trying to tell people, well, we don't want to repeat the Nazis, right? So banning symbols of hate. Oh my God. Okay, so all that to say, this is the place to go. If you just type in legislation at a glance, Parliament of Canada, and you can keep track. And as I just saw for Bill C-36, it might have morphed. Because often they start as a bill and then they're morphed into and combined in these mega bills, omnibus bills. So it's good to keep track. So that's the update. Next week, I think some of the Freedom Convoy organizers will start testifying, which will make things a bit more interesting. Because that's another possibility and this relates to our next point about controlled opposition. We need to check the time, 10:30. We only have half an hour before we appear on Jason Lavigne's panel. But that'll give us enough time to begin. I can check that one off. With the controlled opposition question, yeah, it's a good segue. So some of these witnesses, like Pat King, have questionable pasts, either for being associated and or espousing what could be considered white supremacist positions, and for also suggesting that this crisis won't end until bullets are used or something. He has this claim, I should be careful. So he was indirectly suggesting that violence might be necessary to resolve this conflict, right? And the idea of controlled opposition, yeah, probably easier. Again, Wikipedia, you have to be careful. What? What? Controlled opposition isn't... Wait. I was just there yesterday, or... Oh, what's going on? Again, don't jump to conclusion. Wow. Okay, well, this could be interesting. But it comes from Lenin, I think. He said the best way to control opposition is to lead it, right? And it's the idea that the government can amplify certain people's voices who care about freedom, but who are very strange and unsavory and extreme or distasteful, as a way to tarnish the real freedom movement, right? And so, yeah, this is a new mystery. I would literally, actually, I might even, anyways. And so that's another twist, is that even though the evidence seemed overwhelmingly damning against the government, and leading to the conclusion that it was completely unjustified to use the Emergencies Act. But maybe some of these witnesses are going to make such fools of themselves that the judge will still be able to rule in favor of the government, right? So that's the only other thing I can think of. Again, if you have more creative ideas on how else this might end, let me know. But that's one of my only two, is that the witnesses representing the Freedom Convoy are going to be so exaggerated or say such ridiculous things, it's going to tarnish the conclusion by the judge, and or they're going to call a new emergency before the end of the Emergencies Act inquiry. That seems even less probable, but again, we have to think about all possibilities. And so we're going to go to my list. Let's see here. So I'll present various lines of evidence that suggest that, to some extent, again, this is it's 50 shades of controlled opposition, but I'll present at least some evidence that there is controlled opposition contaminating the freedom movement, which would be to the government's advantage. And one thing to clarify is that you don't need, just go here, the people involved don't need to be in on it, in the sense that they most likely don't realize that they are acting in a way that is controlled opposition, right? So Randy Hillier is one example where, in my experience and independent sources have argued that he's controlled opposition, because he was with the PC provincial government for, I believe, over 10 years, was then kicked out, became an independent. Actually, I wanted to go to his website. And so this is on the website. He hasn't posted anything since March 30, 2022. And that was exactly my argument, that he was helping, he was doing a lot of public events, public speaking, opposing the COVID measures. But in other ways, there was red flags, because he seemed just a bit of unhinged. He kind of portrays the stereotype of hillbilly, redneck, gun-toting hillbilly with a big belly. He can be vulgar, and he can be aggressive. Oh yeah, I could. Is it here? So this is one other source, and I will try to link in the description. This blog is called Overdue Revolutions. And yeah, he had like these very strange interactions, very aggressive. I think it's the other one. Nope. Okay, it was somewhere else, but it was at a rally, and he was basically being given a ticket, and he went to receive his ticket, but then was literally almost fighting with the police officers. So again, really making everyone else look bad and look extreme. So I already had suspicions But then he was collecting examples of young, healthy individuals. So this actually was, oh no, it was fall 2021. And so I emailed him because I wanted more details, because it did seem suspicious at the time. There was something like maybe 15 young people that had young healthy people with suspicious deaths. And he wrote a letter saying to the police they need to investigate. And it was pretty decent, but I thought he could, how does one find the true opposition? Oh, here's a good question. And can the so-called controlled opposition be turned into real opposition? Okay, great question. We'll get to that. We also be mindful of the time. And so he did reply to my email, and I was impressed. And he said, well, he actually offered to do a phone call. So we actually had a 45-minute call where I asked him to, because he had told people to email him, and he tabulated the data, but then I wanted like more details, and he basically said, well, that's a lot of time. I don't really have that much time. And then it didn't make sense, because I mean, he has like $160,000 or $120,000 salary, all these administrative assistants. He probably also has access to lawyers, and so that was kind of, well, if he really cared about young people being injured by the vaccine, then you think he would be a bit more committed to, okay, yeah, I'll get someone to go through the emails, provide you with these details. Then I asked him, are you working with any lawyers to draft the letter? He said no, which also didn't make sense, because if you want a better chance of having an impact, you would work with a lawyer, because he was making specific, I should pull it up, specific claims that the Prime Minister and the health officials are breaking the criminal code, right? So if you're going to make allegations that someone's violating criminal code, it's generally better to have a lawyer. And he didn't. So that was a second red flag. And then he said, well, I can't do that for you, but I can write another blog post and ask people to provide new evidence. And I was trying to say, let's restrict it to less than 30-year-olds. Because he had some 40, 45-year-olds where, again, the older you get, the more ambiguous it is when you die as to what the cause of your death is. Because older people are just statistically more likely to die spontaneously. So he said, oh yeah, I can on his website, he said, okay, I'll write in another post for you, and we'll collect that. And of course he never, well, not of course, but unsurprisingly to me, he never followed up with that promise. And I sent him several reminder emails and never heard back. So yeah, I can show it some other time. So that, and again, interpret it how you will, but to me that was further evidence that there could be more going on. And again, he doesn't need to be in on it in the sense that like he's probably genuinely cares about freedom, but my position was, because of all these red flags, because it's about principles. You can say I care about freedom, and you're organizing all these protests and all these social events. He was even arrested. But are you abiding by your principles? So to me, again, like if you truly believe, oh yes, this was the other red flag. I asked him, so you submitted this letter. Actually, this letter is probably right here. So he submits this letter to, I think, the RCMP commissioner. But then I asked him, okay, so you haven't heard back. And here it is. So this was his letter, November 24th. So requesting an investigation to vaccine-related injuries and deaths to Ontario's chief coroner's office. Oh, maybe because, oh yeah, Thomas Carrick, the commissioner. They have to forward it to the chief coroner. But I asked him, well, did you actually send it to a local police officer, right? Because again, if you find, like, I mean, he's a long time, well, not long, but at least 10-year politician in around Kingston, Ontario. So it's better to find people who who you have a reputation with, to see. And this is another letter. Adverse, like, so again, a lot of work, a lot of credit he deserves. But when I asked him, did you manage to submit this to a local police officer and get them to investigate and use your personal relationship, your personal reputation of multi-decades? And he said yes, but he couldn't find anyone to bring it to the attention of their boss. So he said he talked to a few police officers and they weren't willing to risk their job, right? But again, like, if he truly believes people are being injured or dying from the COVID vaccine, then you think he would push a bit harder and just keep going. I mean, there's thousands of police officers in Ontario he could keep contacting and get to the bottom and literally go from police station to police station to police station. And he chose not to do that, right? So that was another red flag, is he didn't seem that motivated to actually submit his letters to real policemen that he knows, right? So going back to Ian's question, how does one find the true opposition? It's looking at, it's actually more, it's looking at the person's values, principles, and their ethics. So again, we specifically are very transparent about, these are the journalistic standards that we must meet: high ethical standards, journalistic standards, medical ethics standards, scientific standards, declaring conflict of interest, declaring your financial independence, or disclosing information to ensure you have financial independence. When you look at someone who's opposing the lockdown measures, to distinguish true opposition from controlled opposition, you have to look at their ethical principles and their transparency. So with Randy Hillier, you have to remember, well, he was a long-time provincial politician. He even admits that he was actually he was a smoking buddy with Doug Ford. And so is he really truly that independent? And then indeed, this perspective by Wyatt Claypool and again, you have to look, he worked for Post Millennial, you have to look at his conflict of interest, but he claims there's actually evidence that there was a deal between Randy Hillier and Doug Ford because of the way he was allowed to benefit from Doug Ford changing the law that says independent, because again, he was kicked out of the PC party and became an independent MPP, and somehow Doug Ford changed the Elections Act in a way to give him $66,000 that he could use for his events, whereas this other independent who had a new party, Belinda, where is it? Jim Karahalios and the new blue party, Belinda Karahalios, she was not entitled to that. So again, the truth is in the details, but it would help to explain why, he was organizing all these events, writing all these letters, but he still was not really pushing hard enough against Doug Ford. And ultimately, as I predicted, he could just disappear anytime. And this is exactly. So he ended up, and he didn't collaborate. So Belinda and Jim Karahalios, they were trying to form a new party. No, they did form a new party, the Blue Party, to actually oppose the COVID measures. And he was not interested in joining forces. The new Blue Party of Ontario as a right-of-centre alternative to Doug Ford's Ontario PC party. and at one point, Randy Hillier decided, he's going to attempt to form his own provincial political party 6 months before the election, which didn't make sense. And then he ended up not even running. And now he's AWOL, right? So he's not going to save us, right? And he's gone. And as you can tell from his website, his last post is March 30th. He's still on Twitter, but so that's Randy Hillier, and that's again just scratching the surface. There's other perspectives, like this one we can get into next time. But, and then it goes on. Chris Sky and Rob Carbone. Again, what's unclear there is very unsavory people that are very vulgar, and you could question his independence again. He's the son of some big-time land developer in Toronto, and he has this strange business he's been working for, but it's unclear how is he making his money. And is he a grifter? He's selling cannabis, selling crypto. Oh, that's the other way to answer the question is look at people's ethics and principles, whether they're abiding by strict ethical principles, and also look, are they grifting? Are there other ways that they're benefiting personally? Because a lot of these people, they love attention. They love their ego. And so are they serving more their ego than serving the interests of the everyday citizen? So if they're, like Chris Sky, I'm all about freedom and human rights, but then, here, buy some cannabis products, buy some edibles, buy some, right? So that's another way to look at it. Pat King, the same. They can tarnish the freedom people because they say, he's condoning violence, he supports the white replacement theory, he maybe is a bit too much white nationalist sentiment. Kellyanne Wolf and the Line, Rocco Galati, even lawyers. Maxime Bernier, Friesen Grizzly Patriot, Pierre Poilievre, and then the Alberta Independence Party, Arthur Pavlovsky, Tamara Lich, and Rebel News. So that's... But for each of these for each of these entities, there is lines of evidence. You can debate the merit and the compellingness of the evidence, but there's definitely evidence suggesting that to some extent the Freedom Convoy has been infiltrated by controlled opposition. And again, controlled opposition is a misnomer. It doesn't mean these people are literally being controlled. It just means that given their characteristics, they are interfering with the organic freedom movement because they have negative characteristics, whether it's like Randy Hillier, this kind of redneck hillbilly behaviors, or Chris Sky. You have this, big meathead gym guy with tattoos in his neck, and his wife is big, fake breasts and bimbo looking. Kellyanne Wolf, who claims to have an IQ of 190 and goes on Oprah Winfrey, clearly really an attention seeker. And there's other claims we'll go through specifically at the Toronto protest. Okay, so that's all we have now. The last question, the follow-up was, can the so-called controlled opposition be turned into real opposition? Well, you could try, and this is what I'm trying to do. Like, even if I had question marks about Randy Hillier, I decided, okay, let's try to work with him. So by trying to work with these people and then practicing what you preach, you will be able to see, because if they don't want to work with you, then maybe they are afraid of your ethics. And that's why we take such a strong stance at transparently disclosing our ethical standards and our conflict of interest. So that when we work with others, we can kind of say, well, are you comfortable with that too? And if they're not, then you know that potentially they are controlled opposition, right? Because a person who's not controlled opposition, they should not be afraid of ethical principles. They should not be afraid of conflict of interest disclosures, right? Because these things are needed to make sure that you're serving the interests of the people rather than your own interest, your side business, your side hustle, or your other ego interests. Okay, I need to take a quick break before I join Jason Lavigne's stream, but hold on tight, and we'll be right back. I guess I can
this forward in a collaborative way by taking the lead. Was it actually necessary? Maybe Chief Slowly had other information that would cause me to reconsider where I was at that point in time. But that's where I was at. I was at that juncture that had we not been asked to assume command and control of this operation, that I would have felt obligated to make that known to the minister for consideration to be known to the Ontario Civilian Police Commission.
Okay. You never had occasion to have that conversation with Chief Slowly, correct?
I did not, no.
He resigned sometime after, or maybe even during this call. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sometime between us having this call and plans to seek a meeting with Chief Slowly.
Okay, and then you had a follow-up call with Commissioner Lucky, and this time with members of the OPS as well. Right?
Correct. Yes. And
if I could get OPP 50788. I think these are the minutes from that second call on that day. But while they're being brought up, can you tell us about what was discussed during that call?
It was confirming that we were in a position to operationalize the February 13th plan. There were no obstacles standing in our way, that there was a clearly articulated and described command structure. There are various forms of describing incident command. So we wanted to make sure there was a clear understanding. So we diverted to a model most commonly known to the RCMP, gold, silver, bronze. And at that point, came to agreement that it would be an absolute unified command, and that we would be sending Deputy Commissioner Chris Harkins, and the RCMP would be sending Deputy Commissioner Mike Duhem to represent our services on the gold level, which was on the same level as the Chief of Ottawa.
Okay. And had you not had success in achieving unified command until this call with then Interim Chief Steve Bell? Like you just described that, okay, we're going to have unified command, we've got this plan, and we are going to action it. What had been the impediment to doing that on the 14th or on the 13th when the plan was completed?
I think Ottawa Police Service is in the best position to answer that. You know, not having had the opportunity to have that conversation with Chief Slowly, I can't say that I'm in a position to sit in judgment as to specifically what prevented that plan from moving forward from the 13th to the 15th. You're going to have to discern that from the evidence provided by Ottawa Police and your discussion with Chief Slowly. But I had yet to have that conversation with Chief Slowly.
Okay, I'm back. We're just waiting for
the result
inquiry
of this
lunch break,
second conversation, the resignation,
which is
and the
when
second
the
conversation,
Jason Lavigne's panel discussion
the plan for a unified command was that
begins.
you no longer had concerns to escalate to the Deputy Solicitor General. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Let me check my email.
Did you, on the 15th,
A great question. Thank you, Ian,
after these calls, did you
the
speak
great
to the Deputy Solicitor
question?
General
Two
about what had
questions.
transpired?
And yeah, this is
On the
hard
15th,
stuff.
yeah, I can't
do,
say exactly at what time,
but it's really
but we
important.
did have communication throughout the day, and certainly by the time we had concluded things,
Should we enter the studio?
The way forward. I did have some concerns over an interim chief. My concern was that if an interim chief was appointed,
let's try.
That was unfamiliar with all of the work that had been done.
Oh, and then
and we were in a position that we had to start from ground zero and do a briefing and seek commitment and agreement. That was a concern of mine. And I did have that conversation with the Deputy Solicitor General just to make him aware that I was concerned as to how the Police Service Board would choose
and I think I actually want to
And again, that was for his situational awareness. As it turned out, somebody from within the police service assumed that position, so we did not have to start from ground zero.
Was your concern because you had heard that there was
Choppy.
going to be an external interim chief?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And you relayed that to the Deputy Solicitor General?
At some point in time throughout the day, we had that conversation, yes. And not concerned in terms of the board exercising its authority, but it would need to be clearly defined in that if somebody new was being introduced to the relationship, it would have to be exclusive to the day-to-day operations of the Ottawa Police Service outside of this event. We needed to be able to move forward seamlessly with this plan without having to start from the beginning.
Okay.
And did you specifically mention Steve Bell as an appropriate interim chief, or did you just relay the concern?
Going to be providing I just advice. There are policing advisors that advise the police service boards. So should that discussion be taking place, I thought it was appropriate that my concerns be relayed in the event that that would have any impact on decisions that would be made by the police services board. But at no point in time did I recommend anyone or oppose anyone for that position. It was not about the individuals. I recommend anyone or oppose anyone.
Commissioner, I see we're at 1 o'clock, and now would be, I'm glad to check.
Okay. Looks like it's working.
Okay, so this is time for our lunch break, so we'll take an hour and back in an hour to continue. Thank you. Time for our lunch break, so we'll take an hour.
The commission is in recess for 1 hour. La commission en avait pour 1 heure.
Bonjour, Etienne.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm still
We can hear you. We can see your green screen and all.
on the technical. Yeah, it doesn't look as nice, but had to use a second camera because we're live streaming from a live stream. And,
well, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so just give me 1 quick minute as I do a quick little intro and hello. So everybody's not just surprised.
Sure.
We're not just going to drop this on them like the Emergency Act. We'll give people a little bit of notice so they're prepared. Wow, that was a great morning, everybody. So the commissioner was full of truth, nothing but the truth, and help him God. Clearly, this man is nothing but integrity through and through. It's just seeping out of him. And the way he talks, the way he takes his time, the way he organizes his thoughts and makes sure that it's all working right. It's incredible. What time are they breaking, Wayne? Now. They're breaking now for 1 hour. So it'll be for 1 hour for lunch. The convoy will likely attest this. Yeah, for sure. So I really thought we'd do it. Yeah, no, totally. We all had the rumblings that the EA might be coming down. There were some rumors about it, but just like open source information, rumors are rumors. But truly, the people who had the legal minds and knew what the EA meant never saw it coming. They said there's no way. Like that is so far down the field of out of bounds that there's no way they're going to do that. We were wrong. We were wrong. And we're finding that out in this inquiry, just how unnecessary it truly was. There's nothing but testimony today about how unnecessary it was. Well, that along with the OPS's disorganization and inability to reach out for help when they needed it. There seems to be a lot of pride in that police force services. But yeah, there you go. We're getting a ton of testimony. So much integrity. You got it, Sandy. Absolutely. It's just oozing. And you can now see, where the OPP itself, we've had, I think, four witnesses from the OPP now. One of them was slightly political. You can tell with some of his answers. Purdy was trying to dance a political line as well. I don't think he lied. He just didn't give full answers, and he skirted a lot and backpedaled a lot. But other than that, the integrity has been very high with the OPP all the way down the chain. So I'm not surprised to hear what we're hearing today. It's wonderful testimony. And for everybody that's going to watch, at the end of this stream today, Connie, I'm doing this for you. So if you're watching it, I'll do a full recap so that the last little bit there is more in detail about the first morning, because I would love to spend this time here with Etienne. Etienne, I've been trying to practice your name, so I hope I'm close enough now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also feel a little bit bad that we didn't have enough time on the last chat because we had so many heads on the screen, because I just met you, I think, the day before. You reached out to me. You had a wonderful email. I love when those emails come in. I usually pull my wife aside and say, hey, read this with me, because they're pretty cool emails. So thank you for that. And I think you identified what it is I'm looking for in my path forward and why I'm putting my energies here. This is a full-time unpaid job, and then some. So there has to be more than just a desire to be a politician. There needs to be a passion behind it. And I think you recognize that. And I also recognize the same passion in you, because here you are putting your time and energy forward to help democracy in a way you think is necessary. And I think you have a lot of support around that. So what I wanted to do is I reached out to you and I said, hey, let's get you on for the full hour, basically by yourself. And let's let Canada know what it is you're working on so that we can get that out there. So everybody, this is Etienne, wonderful name. And he's here to talk about Save Democracy, a group that he's passionate about. And yeah, it's all yours there, Etienne.
Thank you. Yeah, so savingdemocracy.ca is the website, and it's a new initiative to strengthen democracy through various activities, long-form analysis, civil debates, and investigative journalism. And we have a specific task to estimate the health of Canada's democracy with respect to our fundamental freedoms, and then as a second step, actually try to pass new legislation to strengthen or bulletproof, add checks and balances to our democratic process, because we of course have checks and balances, but with all this COVID measures, this is shown to us unambiguously that they are insufficient. And this might sound ambitious to try to pass legislation, but I still think it's worth a shot, and we can debate those ideas. Of course, Jason is running for an independent MP, and I mean we can talk about that later. There's so much to talk about, because it also seems ambitious and maybe like, is there really a chance? So, and that's a common thing. People like, do you think really is there a chance? Again, if you look at the track record, like we talked about during our last panel discussion, if we've been this abysmal in our progress with all the different groups and the lawyers, does it really make sense to keep going that route? And does it make sense to be an independent? Like, how much impact can you have? But either way, we need to have as many different approaches and really try to debate the merits of these different tactics and throw everything we have at the kitchen sink. So briefly about my background before I jump into this new infographic. My background is in science. So I was trained in social psychology, but while doing my PhD, I actually discovered serious methodological problems with the way we were trained to do research, and then started pushing for higher rigor in our research, more transparency, more replication, against the advice of my professors, because that's just the type of person I am. I'm a principled person, and even if it means sacrificing my professional career, I just have to fight for principles. And I not only finished my PhD, but then I went on to do a postdoc where I actually was calling out professors for being insufficiently transparent. And then I joined what's considered the open science movement, because it's a global movement to try to make science more transparent, more rigorous. And we had small victories, but really the take-home message was, most of these academics are not actually, like, they say they're interested in transparency, but they're not, most of them are not willing to walk the walk. And I actually discovered corruption in the open science movement, almost like controlled opposition. And then I decided, well, I'll just go on my own, and then I'll submit this evidence to the government. And then I was shocked that the government and the funding agencies also didn't seem concerned about these low standards. And that's what led me to democracy, because a democracy is supposed to be based on science, the rule of law, but science is one of the main institutions, right, that underlies a democracy, right? We're supposed to base our public policy decisions on credible scientific evidence that is then implemented. And it's not sufficient. I don't want to get into the follow of the science, but follow the science is a red flag, because science can only give you the facts, and that's only if it's well done. So we have low standards, but then you need to go beyond the facts. Like, to actually implement public policy, you need to combine facts with values, right? Values of, like, how much is a life worth? How much is an elderly, frail life worth compared to children? And some of these can be uncomfortable discussions, but it's the job of politicians to really show that they've done all the cost-benefit analyses with their values that are built upon the scientific facts, right? So you should never say we're just following the science, because science doesn't tell you what is the most optimal for your given values for a specific population of people. And so that's why when COVID started, I had skepticism immediately from the beginning, with that background of knowing that, okay, the global academic system is fatally broken at all levels. The researchers, the journals, the universities, the funding agencies, the publishers. And I mean, I have a 10-hour podcast simply on that. So if you type in Saving Science, the Saving Science show, you can get 10 hours of details on this. And again, I'm not just a crank. I'm a published author in psychology, meta-science. You can go to Google Scholar. I've published in some of the world's most prestigious journals, including Science itself. And so with COVID, I realized, and even in 2015, I'm working on a book called Dangerous Deceptions that tells my story of blowing the whistle in science, and then the strange pushback I received, because we thought, we'll just raise transparency standards, we'll raise replication standards, and we can be on our way. But then we discovered these problems are systemic, even in medical science. And then, as I mentioned, we realized that most of these professors are not interested in actually implementing new transparency standards. We even did the world's first transparency audits in science, which resulted in people slinging mud at me, calling me racist, and all kinds of nastiness. And I warned in that book. I warned because people were like, "Oh, you're an idealist. Nothing is perfect. Science can't be perfect." And I warned people when academic science standards are so low, it can allow rogue governments or any rogue or any company, pharmaceutical companies. It allows them to weaponize low quality science to serve their agenda rather than the agenda of citizens, right? But now that I realized, well, now it kind of makes more sense that that the funding agencies are not interested in fixing science in the way they give money, because maybe they are benefiting from broken science, and so they're weaponizing broken science to further their agenda. And so that's the background of how I got to saving science, because I realized, saving democracy, because if we don't have democracy, well, then there's no need for science. There's no need for real science if the tyrants can just decide what their interests are, because again, that was the Enlightenment period, right? We can base our decisions on science and carefully constructed public policies rather than just religion or authority or authoritarianism. And then I started digging into the health of our democracy, and maybe this is a good time I'll try to share my screen.
Well, if you don't mind. So
or
Sandy,
maybe, go ahead.
Yeah, so Sandy agrees with you here. So yes, it's science is a foundation to making good decisions, and you're right. So when you're doing policy and you need politicians involved, we rely upon heavily the information given to us, and if that information is flawed, skewed, or otherwise, it could be nothing but problems for us. And you nailed it. Science isn't a certainty. Science is a process. It's something that we're always working on, and if you exclude it as one of the pillars to democracy, you're absolutely right. You're going to have to go to sages or the grand master of wisdom who's just going to tell you what everything is. And that is absolutely totalitarianism. That's exactly one of their pillars, is to just give you the information. Okay, so let me add your screen to this.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, no, it's on my end. I had to push a button for you.
Perfect.
Oh, now we got me too. Too many of me. I'll get everybody to run away.
So this is the main thing I wanted to present, because of course there's probably thousands of scandals and developments that are an assault on our fundamental freedoms. But I was trying to organize it because we have limited resources, right? We got to focus. What are the key stories to focus on, right? As an initiative for anyone, right? And so I decided to go to the Constitution. The Constitution, of course, has like 34 sections, I believe, and I was trying to distill it. What are the most fundamental freedoms that give life, that make life worth living, right? And I broke it down to these 6 categories, starting with individual human rights. And I'm trying to organize them so they actually make sense too. The most important, in my opinion, would be bodily autonomy and having health, right? Because without bodily autonomy and health, then you can't enjoy the other freedoms, like freedom of assembly, right? So
this is to zoom in on that one.
Yeah. So this is the idea of starting with bodily autonomy. So once you have your own bodily autonomy, you have your own health and your own decisions, then you can use your body to speak your mind, right? So you can speak your mind with the freedom of expression and speech. And then you have democratic rights that allow you to participate if you want. And that's the luxury of democracy. You could ignore politics if you want, right? But you can also participate in it. And then, of course, once you have those individual human rights, well, then you can have what I'm calling interpersonal or interspatial human rights, which is then decide I'm going to use my healthy voice and I'm going to associate with other groups. Freedom of association in private, or freedom of assembly in public, right? So I can use my healthy body and my voice, and I can speak my mind, right? And then I can travel the world, travel the provinces, travel Canada, freedom of mobility, and then finally life, liberty, and security, which is kind of miscellaneous, but it's what allows you to pursue gainful living, pursue gainful employment, and maybe even self-defense.
And whether it was intentional or not, you laid out the three that were stolen from us during this convoy, during the last 2 years. Those were the three that were stolen from us.
Well, and actually, I would argue that
all of them.
That all of them. So this is what, again, like you can pick and choose. Say, okay, there's a crisis over here, crisis over there, but now and I'm not going to go through all of them. But these are 17 developments.
Okay, so my still up, everybody.
Oh, I think you cut out a little bit. Is to use again and this is mixing metaphors, but think about your own body. Are you still there? Oh, okay. If you had a bruised knee and a scraped forehead, right? You could say, well, you've got some injuries, but they're not life-threatening, right? So your body's still overall healthy, even though you have a few isolated injuries. In this case, I would argue.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Go ahead.
These are vital organs, right? Because again, these are just the 6 most basic, in my opinion, right? So it's different than just saying, well, there's some minor problems with democracy over there, but they're isolated, right? This arguably is there's problems with our 6 most basic fundamental freedoms that make life worth living, and there's a systemic health problem because our vital organs are injured, right? Like our lungs, our heart, our brain, right? And so it's a lot more concerning than just, there's a few problems, because there's always been problems with democracy, right? I mean, there's no system that's perfect. But I would argue that this is the first time where it's become more obvious that our vital democratic organs are injured, that therefore make it more concerning. Does that make sense? Because each development in of themselves are concerning, but when you combine them in this chart, it's even more concerning. It should be more concerning to you. And then adding insult to injury, it would appear these authoritarian flavored developments are actually happening in virtually all other Western democracies.
You're right.
Which makes it more concerning. And I have European correspondents, which we'll have on my show, and they will give us their perspectives, right? So it's important to keep in mind and to interpret these developments in the broader geopolitical context, because it's not just Canada that's facing these problems, right? And so
right.
I can maybe give you a chance, and then I can give more details. Go ahead.
No, sorry. What I was going to say is you're right, because a lot of times we just focus in on individual rights that we've lost, for example, gun rights or mobility. And what we don't do enough of is zoom out and see the totalitarian, the total of what's going on here, and then zoom out even further to the global level.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like there's a lot of coordination or maybe coincidence about a whole bunch of countries doing very similar things, and attacking their version of these rights in similar ways. So yeah, I see what you're saying, and I don't know how much we can go into all that, but when other countries start acting very similar, you start wondering if there's an agenda, right?
Yeah, and yeah, maybe just very quickly, and a lot of it relates to the Emergencies Act. So the key stories are serious problems with COVID vaccine safety and efficacy evidence, mandatory COVID vaccination for employment and general participation in society, because this would even be a problem in the event that the COVID vaccine was actually safe and effective. Mm-hmm. It would still be a medical ethics violation to make it mandatory, right? And then insufficient justification for mandatory masking, freezing of bank accounts, freedom convoy donors, insufficient justifications for invoking Emergencies Act, which of course is what's being covered.
Which we're seeing right now, yeah.
Insufficient, invalid justifications for the new hate speech legislation and new social media regulation legislation. Trudeau labeling COVID unvaccinated individuals as anti-science who are often racist and misogynistic.
Yeah, we like that one.
Trudeau unwilling to listen to 6 to 7 million Canadians concerned about and or against COVID mandates. I think you've covered that too, right? In our panel. So there's the double standard. Why is that double standard? A democracy, again, it's when I was rereading this, you have the right to participate in the democratic process, to have one's voice heard in Parliament, right? That's a right, but somehow Trudeau is not willing to meet Freedom Convoy organizers or protesters, but he is willing to meet Black Lives Matter, right? So that's a big mystery that seems incompatible with our normal democratic process. And then insufficient justifications for prohibiting rail air travel to COVID unvaccinated individuals, insufficient justifications for prohibiting travel. This was before the vaccines. There was this heartbreaking case of like a woman in PI woman from Nova Scotia trying to go to PI to care for her dying mother, was rejected, sued the government, and then lost.
Wow.
And then finally, insufficient justifications for closures during lockdowns, insufficient explanations for ongoing and worsening problems with the healthcare, despite increasing investments. So that's also another big mystery that maybe makes a little bit more sense once you start, again, taking a broader look. And so we want to look into that, because it appears like there's decreasing quality of care despite increasing investments. And then the emergency room wait times seem to be getting out of control. And they've always been bad, but it seems to be getting worse than bad, right? Even some small hospitals that you may have seen, now even shutting down emergency room altogether for like overnight or the entire weekend, which is unprecedented, right?
Well, I can tell you that Drayton Valley closed down their maternal ward because they don't have an anesthesiologist. So all births in our area have to go to Edmonton now.
Right. And so we would need to look at that, because they're claiming, well, there's staff shortages.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are many reasons for staff shortages, and maybe some of them you're responsible for, right? By making the COVID vaccine mandates, that led to a lot of people quitting or being laid off, and then just a general toxic environment. There's all these reports that, keep to yourself. So some brave nurses are trying to speak up, and they're either told, to hush, or they'll face disciplinary action. So you can't just blame staff shortages when arguably they are responsible for their staff shortages.
Right, and one of the challenges that we're working with in Alberta is because the federal government has put down 2 harsh immigration rules when it comes to experts and people with PhDs. It's difficult to get it to be translated to Canadian, and we have a lot of capable, competent people here not practicing because of the restrictions on the immigration level. So this goes right back to the federal government as well. By choking the professionals that are available to immigrate, it's also shrinking the talent pool available to us. So in Alberta, we're fighting hard to recognize some nurses and fast track them into the services.
Yeah, and that's encouraging. And I think it's called also credential, like trying to equate, medical credentials from different countries and trying to harmonize them so that they don't have to, retrain and take longer to meet the Canadian standard. Because I definitely agree there needs to be a standard, but if they are comparable, they should just be fast tracked.
That's the argument. Yeah, that's the argument, because they are comparable. Certain countries have great programs. We just don't recognize them.
Right. And then the last one, insufficient justifications for the new gun control legislation. And then these sneaky order in councils, which I didn't even knew existed until like 3 months ago. So that shows you, and I would assume a lot of Canadians, I would assume most Canadians don't even know these loopholes and these backdoors where they can pass. And they just passed another one, I think, more recently about the handguns, right? And order in councils completely avoid the parliamentary debate stage in the House Commons and the Senate. And again, these are 17. So this is just 17 developments out of like maybe thousands, but I argue these are among the most crucial that should be followed, and we should try to get to the bottom of it. And that's the other thing the last thing to point out is by the label active means that we're doing an active investigation, where we both have current action and the next action. I can even zoom in a bit more. So, for example, I submitted my evidence to Health Canada and about 30 MPs last fall, September 2021, for a safety signal with the COVID vaccine based on the government's own data, which was corroborated by other independent peers. So it's not peer-reviewed, but it's peer-reviewed in the informal sense. I have several PhD collaborators who review my work and even send it to friends, smart, careful engineers. I mean, you don't need to be officially a scientist to be able to look through data and check and recheck and double check from different perspectives and see if it's consistent with other evidence of other people who lack conflict of interest. And basically got no response. Even email Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Health Ontario. Basically got no response, or these template messages of like, copy and paste. Oh, here's reasons that you can trust the vaccines, and it's just copy and pasted
Right.
from somewhere else. And none of the MPs, a few MPs responded with a template message, but none actually looked into it substantively. And so the next action would be to submit ethics violation complaints against the Public Health Agency of Canada and all contacted MPs who did not investigate, and then submit the evidence to other. So we only sent it to about 30 because it's it's very time intensive. But like this evidence should be submitted to all other MPs, provincial politicians, even municipal. And then the same for the mandatory COVID vaccination. I think there's a case to be made, and we're working with lawyers, but there's definitely a case to be made that there's been some kind of ethics violation against Trudeau and the Public Health Agency for violating the Nuremberg Code. I mean, the Nuremberg Code, you can't just violate that and pretend there's no problem. This is highly egregious, and again, by trying to organize it this way helps to show the urgency. And I don't want to be alarmist. I mean, I'm against alarmist and sensationalizing news, of course. I want to pursue the truth, and the truth can be dark. But to be in the best position of trying to figure out how can we make progress on these problems, the idea was to organize them into these basic categories. And again, these are the basic fundamental freedoms that make life enjoyable. And as we saw during COVID, I mean, that was, unprecedentedly dark. How quickly we lost these freedoms, and we weren't even able or supposed to visit grandma or go to Christmas or go, all these very precious moments with our family and friends were just gone. So yeah, that's the presentation or the
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So we got lots to talk about there. So some of the movements you did is you sent it to some MPs, but you're using the government that has the problem. So the current government is the one that has the problem. So we're submitting stuff to them, ethics violations, etc. And of course, you could probably presume you aren't the only highly credentialed person also doing that. There's probably lots of other people silently even doing it. So clearly they're going to be receiving a bunch and template response, a whole whack of them. So what do you think that this government, if aware, would be capable of actually doing? Do you think that an ethics violation would raise it to the point where we got Henshaw or we have some other health leaders answering questions like they would do in the States? They have Fauci sitting in front of a senator talking. Would we do something like that? Could it get to that point? Also, one thing to realize is we didn't really have a clear distinction on the human rights around medical. So it's tough to say during that period of time how much of a violation it was, because it wasn't in there. It wasn't one of the protected classes. But in Alberta, we're looking to add that one to the Alberta Human Rights Code, so that going forward, it's definitely a clear violation.
Which one specifically? Sorry.
The human rights code for Alberta. So we have our own. So within the next 3 months, Danielle Smith has committed to amending the Human Rights Code of Alberta to include medical. So you have the right to medical privacy. Because it's not listed there, it wasn't protecting anybody during employment issues during those phases.
But it is in the criminal code. So informed consent, pretty sure is in the criminal code.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I think what you're going at is going to be a challenge because I'm going to play the devil's advocate there.
Actually, I agree. But it was just to clarify what you were saying. Yeah, I do think that these routes are going to lead nowhere, but you still need to start from the start. But go
sure.
Yeah.
Because the criminal code one will be difficult because everybody that got the vax, even though if it was under duress, voluntarily took it. On that level, when it comes to the criminal
well, it's
code.
not, but it's not technically. Like once you're under duress or coercion, it's no longer voluntary informed consent.
And I'm not going to argue too much about that because it has to certainly be tested, and I think we're going to have a Supreme Court decision around that, and I think you're going to be happy with that decision ultimately. But the challenge with it is until that's been done, it's debatable. So it's going to be a challenge. I don't disagree. And also when you brought up the Nuremberg Code, that, of course, there's a whole whack of stuff. Even the way they treated the protesters, there's a whole whack of violations of international law. What do we do? There isn't, like, do civilians bring it up to an international court? Do we even trust international court? Do we trust UN? Is there even an avenue there outside of our country? And would it even be beneficial to try and pursue one of those? For example, the human rights violations on the protesters alone, that itself could stand as an international court matter. The way they responded to that, and that might actually happen after the inquiry is complete, and we'll see what comes out. But is that a realistic thing that Canadians can maybe look forward to, or even attempt, or is that just we're just going to the global leader now, and they're just going to quash us there at that level, anyways?
Yeah, no, I don't think the chances are very high because of the track record of, like I mentioned, like there's hundreds, if not thousands, of other independent groups, credentialed people, highly lawyered up people and groups with almost basically no progress. But of course you can also try, with the more independent crowd or like the opposition. And this I also tried and was disappointed. So for example, Randy Hillier, I actually reached out to Randy Hillier, and he did call me. Like he did respond to some emails. We had a 45-minute call last fall, but it seemed a bit half-hearted. He said, so at the time the context was he had written a letter to the RCMP commissioner about these suspicious young person deaths following vaccination, of suspicious deaths, because again, young people do spontaneously die, like young as in like teenagers and 20-year-olds. They do spontaneously die, but at a very low rate. So he penned a pretty good letter and submitted it to the RCMP commissioner that they started an investigation. So I reached out to him for more details because I thought his letter could be improved in his analysis. So I wanted to do a more quantitative analysis of what he was asserting. And again, he did grant me a 45-minute call, which was very generous. But then throughout the call, it seemed to be some red flags as to his commitment to his letter. Because again, his letter, it's pretty compelling, but yet he didn't seem to want to invest any more time, like finding the details I was asking for. Then he promised, well, I can create another blog post that ask for those details instead of hiring an administrative assistant to go through the thousands of emails that he gets apparently. But then he never did it, so he never followed up on that, and I followed up, and now he's kind of he's kind of retired, right? So he there was all that scandal about he formed his own provincial party instead of joining forces with the new Blue Party, and then he'd end up not running, right? And so now he's no longer like he's no longer able to help us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point of mentioning that is that, yeah, indeed, we have to try these alternative paths because, yeah, we know that the establishment politicians are most likely not going to be able to respond for mysterious reasons. It seems like they are constrained by other constraints that are unbeknownst to us.
I don't think it's mysterious at all. I think that's party platform and whip that you're running into there.
Yeah, and then yeah, and we don't. I mean, maybe we do have time, but the World Economic Forum, and even it's not really that hard to find evidence, and even yesterday I found even more dark developments where they were. Even in the early 2000s, if you look at the legislation they were passing in Canada, they were like in even 2004, they started passing legislation that was basically copied and pasted from the World Health Organization. They were developing these harmonized international health regulation to deal with potential pandemics, and they have this Quarantine Act, and it's very well documented that they are basically copy and pasting from this international, and again, that's on the surface that sounds reasonable, right? I mean, okay, maybe there are better ways, because if it is a pandemic, then you would want some coordination that different countries are meeting actual higher standards for how to deal with this, right? But then the concern is losing individual sovereignty, right? Because kind of like the provinces, health is a provincial matter. So, we need to make sure that the people that have power over us is as local as possible, right? So then you get that accountability and that feedback, right? But if Canada is signing and into law these quarantine acts that are maybe serving other people's interests, like that's dangerous, and we lose individual sovereignty as a country, right, to deal with our own issues, even though it could be a global issue.
Mm-hmm. So we had a whistleblower from the federal government join us last week or so. So if you haven't seen that video, check it out. It's only an hour. And she's on the science side of things. She's a very credentialed.
Yeah, I did hear part of it.
So one of the challenges that we were talking about was exactly what you just said there. So global science coming down the pipe, and we were basically rubber stamping it. We weren't doing much with it. We weren't even looking into it, validating, qualifying in any way what we were getting. And she, of course, brought that up as a major concern. So we were chatting about, well, how do we have our current government do more of that at the same time that we're not happy with what they did do? So how do we kind of change the system and trust it again? And one of the things we spoke about briefly was setting up more of a research and analysis type of groups, whether it was provincial and they all work together, or whether it was a national one with representation from all the provincials, some sort of body that would allow, it could be Canada's science, whatever we end up calling it. But the whole purpose of it is to go ahead and use global sources and receive global guidance and local guidance and research from our universities and other universities. But the purpose of it is to go through the information and do our own homework on a national level. The more that we copy the homework of others, the more we're going to be surprised to find out that there's other things involved in it that we didn't even think about because we didn't do our own homework. And I think it would be a tough thing. Like if we had enough support on an MP level to go ahead and I think we would have to do two stages. First, we would have to do an inquiry and investigation of what did happen. What kind of information did we have? What kind of analysis were we doing? Did we go through the data? So we first have to see what was the attempt we did at this point. Through an inquiry, we'll find out enough information to likely then recommend and develop our own way of handling it much, much better. Through this inquiry, we're seeing kind of that process right now. So this is around what the government can and should and would have been able to do. And then going forward, some more recommendations and possibly a lot of constraints, but we'll see. So I think, there's no magic bullet because we still want science. We want it global. We can't handle all research, so it's really good to coordinate. But like you pointed out at the beginning of this, there's so much corruption and hiding of information. And so for that reason and that reason alone, we should have our own body that's going through and doing our own homework.
Yeah, and they need to meet very high standards.
Very, very
both in terms of transparency standards and conflict of interest, like ethics standards and transparency, because the people in this panel would have to be established to be sufficiently independent and sufficiently transparent with any conflict of interest. And
So
of course, in Ontario, we had the Ontario Science Table. I forget what the parallel in Alberta, but these people were not independent enough, and they had conflicts of interest. I mean, they were getting paid, and of course, their work needs to be paid. But there was concern that there was disproportionate compensation for being on the Ontario Science Table when these people were already professors, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they were all establishment professors. And again, it might be difficult for some people to understand, right? Because if you don't know all the problems going on in the university system, right, it might be hard to understand. But again, in science, you need viewpoint diversity. And even if someone sounds like a crackpot, science is not about vote counting. Sometimes there is consensus in science, but that's not the main criteria for whether you should believe something or not. It's more about the extent to which a piece of work has withstood scrutiny. And you want to scrutinize a piece of work, like ruthlessly scrutinize it, but you can only achieve that if you have sufficient details. And that's why we've been calling for higher transparency standards for decades. But beyond that, also the conflict of interest, financial independence, and so, yeah, that kind of independent, firewalled organization. The other thing I learned is that the Public Health Agency was created out of thin air, more or less, 2004, as a way to, kind of guide, like, kind of federalism, to have, some harmonized approach to health problems. But again, is there sufficient independence between the Public Health Agency and the Chief Medical Officer and the ruling party, right? And COVID has showed us that it's clearly not sufficient, right? Because it seems like they cannot disagree with the mainstream narrative, right? That it's just not possible. And so the value of this group is only valuable to the extent that they can make their actual independent judgments and not fear reprisal or fear any kind of penalty. So that's the one part of it. So maybe you can respond. There was another point that I lost, but it'll come back.
Yeah, no problem. And I think it would be difficult. So how do we filter? How do we deal with mistakes? How do we, like, if we put together this board and we were, trying to get the best of the best, how do we even find them? How do we even filter them? And then how do we deal with, like, a mistake or errors? There's got to be accountability there too. And do you think the magic bullet really is independent, like independent oversight? Watch a lot closer to these
and
groups?
More audits, and then the incentives too. So again, from psychology, behavior is driven by punishment and rewards, right? Rewards and punishment, whether you're talking about raising children or even corporate incentives for how to motivate employees to do better work, right? You can either use rewards or punishments or a combination of both. And so to me, the accountability part, whether it's this independent panel, independent body, or the elected officials themselves, there needs to be more rewards. First of all, there needs to be more rewards for competent decision making. But then, of course, there needs to be more punishments, or any kind of punishment for incorrect or flawed public policy decisions. And I know this sounds pie in the sky, but part of our bulletproofing ideas of trying to brainstorm is to provide stronger rewards and stronger punishments for elected official decision making. And of course, you have to grant, okay, it can be very difficult, and maybe it's an emergency, but if the people in charge are deciding whether it's an emergency or not, there's already a conflict, right? And even if there is a real emergency, that doesn't mean you just throw out democracy and accountability processes out the window, right? And so yes, you have to give benefit of the doubt early on to some extent. But again, if you have these better processes that are bulletproofed and provide better incentives to do your best job and to pursue the interests of the people beyond anything else, even your own ego, your own career interests, that's really what's needed. The second point, and maybe the final, is going back to, you keep alluding to an inquiry, like a broader inquiry, because the Emergencies Act inquiry, as you can see from my diagram, it's only one of the 17 major developments. And that was always my question. When is the broader public inquiry into the COVID measures more generally? When is that coming, right?
Next election. After the next election.
Based on what? Or like...
It will be after the next election. There's no way that this parliament will do that inquiry.
Right, but is this a hope or something you've heard of?
It's the only option we have. It's the first opportunity we're going to have to do that.
But who would declare that? You mean like...
declare it? No, you got to pursue it. So if you're an MP, you can pursue it. You can pursue the inquiry. And
even just if it's one MP?
Yeah, one MP. I in front of it would do it. Independent would do it.
Right. So because that's crucial, right? And that's kind of one of the downsides. I mean, I think they were forced to have an inquiry into the Emergencies Act because of
this one. Yeah, it's built into the statute.
Inquiry Act.
Yep.
And now I think Conservative MP Lewis is calling for a separate inquiry into the COVID vaccine, specifically COVID vaccine safety, though that seems a bit late to the party. But again, to me, we should be having this broader inquiry, right? And because the problem is, to just a casual onlooker, they could say, well, no, look, democracy is working fine. Look, they have an inquiry and they're going to conclude, the judge is going to give his decision and democracy is working fine, right? But of course, the Emergencies Act is only one small slice of all these other decisions that are arguably unjustified, right? But yeah, 2025, that's really, really, really far away. So maybe quickly, I was interested, like, how did you come to that decision to pursue that strategy compared to other strategies, given that it's, so long from now?
Well, that's the long-term strategy. So that is one that will give us 4 years or 5 years of efforts inside the House. All the other strategies also are valid, lawsuits, social media, pushing from the ground, protest, reaching out to the MPs, lawyers, doctors, political pressure. All of those are also valid. And I think we should never stop any of the different fronts. Use every front you have as long as it's legal and peaceful, but use them all. But the long-term one is, well, we're going to have a lot more impact if we have a key to the back door of the parliament and an office on the inside and a seat in the House. That's by far going to have the biggest impact.
But right now, there are independent, not many.
No, there's two independents that are falling out of the party. Those are not true independents. So there's a very big difference in my mind between someone who received the label of independent because of a party fallout versus someone who went in as an independent. There was a platform from the beginning and have always been independent. It's very, very different. We don't put in independents. It's very rare. But the two that we have right now, one from Spadina, he fell out from the Liberal Party. Some corruption around him, some bad things around him. The Liberal Party tossed him out. He's trying to get back in. And then the other one, which is in Quebec now, recent, he decided to leave the party. So when Pierre won, he decided to leave. Those, I don't consider those true independents by the function in the political party or political system, because they are just falling out. They're like fallen angels from the party.
But even if they're true independents, their role is still quite limited in terms of voting, right? Because their vote basically doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. I disagree with you there, Etienne, and I'm going to push back hard on that one. If you're looking at just straight up votes of being one of 338, sure. Okay. If you just want to look at straight up numbers, one vote out of 338, it seems meaningless.
Right.
But that's not the only function of an independent. Calling them out, standing in question period and being very vocal, going to their doors, knocking on them, meeting with them, working with them to find out ways to bridge some of the problems that they're having, being the referee on the ice, blowing the whistle loudly, having MP powers for investigation and being able to get access to documents and stuff that is not public, being able to establish committees, even privy committees, where we have to sit down and go through private information. All of that becomes available immediately as tools to an independent, well, any MP. Those are all tools of an MP. But what allows the independent to take it a step further is basically MPs have to get permission from their party to do anything like that. Any rogue MP who goes out and starts to establish some sort of initiative on their own, it happens, but they get quashed pretty quickly, because unless they have party support, they're considered rogue and maverick. And that is not part of how parties manage their MPs. And that's exactly why they have whips, and that's why they always utilize whips, is because anytime you have a MP go slightly rogue, it looks like the party is not unified. It looks bad against the party, and they start looking at national optics versus the individual regional issue that MP might be bringing forward. So, for example, our MP, he's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. I've met him. I've talked to him. He's a really nice guy. But let me just give you an example. We want the oil to flow. Okay, it's Alberta. We want the oil to flow. We get the oil flowing properly, and jobs are great for Yellowhead. So Yellowhead really would like to see pipeline, XL, a whole bunch of things being brought forward and being worked on and fought for. He can't. Even if everybody in Yellowhead said to him, hey, let's go push this issue forward. It's not a national issue that's supported. There's no support anywhere else other than Alberta for it. Therefore, the Conservative Party national mandate and platform doesn't have room for it. And what's he going to do? Get together with a few other Conservatives and push hard? He can't. And that's where the independent is not restrained. We're not restrained in that fashion.
Right, but how confident can you be that you'll be treated seriously? So how do you really? So you mentioned about like initiating a public inquiry, but sure. Like what are the odds that they actually would treat you seriously? Because even with Randy Hilliard, we saw in Ontario, and yeah, he's not a true independent because he also came out of Conservative, but he would be mocked. Like he would stand up and say, I don't care about that though. He would say no, but it still shows you that like to the normies, like they just treated Randy Hilliard like he's a UFO for talking about quarantine camps, and it's almost like they're treating him as subhuman. And so I'd be afraid that if you, in the unlikely event you are elected to be a true independent, I'd be concerned that you would not be treated seriously, and you would have more power, as you're correctly pointing out, but it still might be insufficient.
Well, then what's your alternative? Just let another blue backbencher take over? No,
it's just about debating.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah,
right?
what are the costs and benefits of these different approaches, and try to hash out which ones, because it's an incredible amount, and you deserve a lot of praise. It's an incredible amount of effort to dedicate yourself. Like, okay, this is 3 years. I don't know when you started, so you deserve a lot of praise, but you know what I mean. In terms of costs and benefits, it's always the question of are we really maximizing the value of our efforts in terms of probabilities of having impact, and I still think the probabilities of me having an impact is tiny, but
I disagree. I think there's ways.
But it's good. It's good to have these discussions just to try to think of other alternatives, right? Because that's the hard part, thinking of outside the box. Even if you're trying to think outside the box, sometimes you're still overlooking other strategies, and we're still thinking all the time, how can we pivot? How can like in business innovation, right? Like you always have to think, there's potentially ways to pivot to really try to maximize the chance that our efforts are going to have an impact. But I'm sure we'll continue these discussions.
Well, I'd like to kind of respond to that a little bit. I'm glad you brought up business and innovation, because you're absolutely right. That's kind of where we need to do the similar thing in politics. Good news for you, I'm an award-winning business innovator. I won some awards around that. You've got your PhDs and you've got your articles, but I'm an entrepreneur and award-winning. So my mindset has always been innovation. I was even part of the board of Ontario Innovation Center to approve all the grants and stuff like that for companies applying on innovation grants. So I agree with you completely. We got to map innovation into politics, because it's lacking. It's such an old traditional system that has no innovation in it either, like open meetings, streaming everything. There's a whole bunch of things we can do. I disagree with you wholeheartedly that an independent path is kind of fruitless and pointless. I disagree completely, and I also think that
well, I didn't want to insinuate that it's completely useless. I was just expressing concerns. But,
sure, but let me go ahead and respond to that. So Yellowhead specifically has a history of being a little bit more independent than most other ridings in Canada. Joe Clark came from Yellowhead. He was the one prime minister elected for a little while from the West. He's moved from the Conservative Party to independent, so he's fully independent now, because the Conservative Party is no longer the Conservative Party. It's moved too much to the left that kind of just left behind some independent people. And my particular riding is very, very impacted by basically everything you had on your chart, and they are not pleased with the response from the current MP. My riding will not vote in anybody else but a blue or an independent. They won't put anybody else in. So if they do want a voice that's a lot louder than the current one, I think there's only two paths. The first path is get behind an independent, whether it's me or someone else, and that will do it. The second path could be to convince the Conservative Party to drop whips, party platform, and adopt independent MPs, true independent MPs, so that the debates happen inside the party and it's not a platform. And if the party can learn how to truly do debates with independent MPs as part of the team, then I think we're going to be golden. I think we could do a lot more work by fixing the party itself to be more modern and more independent. I've written a letter to the CPC. I've even did it to the PPC and the Bloc to let them know that if you started to do independent MPs, Canada would get behind your party a lot stronger, because Canada's tired of whipped MPs. Now, whether they do it or not, like I sent it to them, I'm just a little guy. We'll see. But
right.
But if we don't start having MPs that actually have independent voices, whether they're party affiliated or otherwise, we're just going to have more of the same, which is exactly what you identified, is useless MPs. They can't do much. And that's a challenge to me, and I recognize that. And because I don't have an avenue where I have an MP that I think will do anything, I'm going to try and be it, because what else do I have?
And what about using business innovations to help your path?
Maybe
we can talk about that next time. But
we can talk about that more
from
about
the social psychology. We need to use business innovation to awaken more people, because again,
the stream is back. So
okay. Because until there's enough people that are awoken, they're not going to consider independence seriously enough. So I just had an idea of trying to use business innovations and social psychology techniques to try to awaken more people.
Well, maybe they need to see one. Maybe they need to see a true independent, what they can do. Maybe just an example of one is enough to wake Canada up. Maybe we only need a couple in this next election to show what it's for. But I agree with you. The parties have done a great job over 100 years convincing people that independents are a wasted vote. They've done a great job, because that's how they kept themselves. But let's try this again. Everybody, that was a wonderful chat. Here we are. The afternoon started. Etienne, we'll chat soon, okay?
The commission is reconvened. La commission reprend.
Here.
Okay, I'm still streaming. Sorry, there was a technical problem. Can you hear me now? Hello. Okay, I did incorrectly hide the back. The Jason's live stream was incorrectly hidden temporarily. My bad. Though the audio, I guess, was still coming through. So learning curve. This is first time I joined someone else's live stream while being on my own live stream. So thanks for bearing with me, and let's just wrap up, because it's already been 3 hours and I need some exercise. But how can we wrap up? That was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to debating that, because he's clearly has the best intention. He does have a lot going for him in terms of his business background. He actually also has a law background that he didn't mention, but so I don't think he has a law degree. He never practiced as a lawyer, but that still gives him, puts him in a better position to understand the law, defend the rule of law, but also better position to potentially change the law and call for new legislation to amend existing laws so that they are, so that we can strengthen democracy and or add new laws. Okay, so, but, and yes, again, I think it's true what he's saying, that the main parties have worked really hard at limiting the impact of independent MPs, and to convince people that independent MPs are kind of a waste of a vote. But in other ways, I do think there are real challenges with going that route, and I got to see that he's very comfortable with actually having a real debate where we can agree to disagree without being insulted. See, that was a very great example. I hope that some of you appreciate that, of saying how, you know, he was vigorously disagreeing with me, but we stuck on the subject, and we remained respectful and civilized, and really I think we're just scratching the surface. And at the end, I was trying to allude to the fact that we could use business innovations and social innovations to try to spread this message that there's a lot more going on, and that the truth is in the details, and we need to be freely able to discuss the details to get at the truth. And because his main challenge is going to be defeating the other people in his writing that have much longer histories, and again, most people, they just vote blue or red, and they don't have time to do their due diligence and to do their homework, right? So you have to have a very aggressive social marketing and maybe other events, and maybe I can even help him try to become more visible. And you know, again, there's all kinds of other possibilities, whether it's social marketing, social events, try to organize social innovations that can scale across Canada. Because I didn't have, that was my other question, is he trying to maybe coordinate other independents? So it'd be cool to have kind of a party of independent MPs who don't have a party whip, but still subscribe to a common set of values, a common set of ethical principles, to really make sure that we're pursuing the interests of all Canadians above and beyond our own interests as politicians or just someone who wants attention, ego, whatever. Okay, so we don't have time to go into the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith 2 follow-ups and then the questions, but we'll get to that next week. And again, we'll make an announcement as to whether we're moving the show to Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, with possibility of me even maybe going down to once a week, given the substantial costs in doing this. And again, maybe try to be more lighthearted, maybe a bit more comedic, informal atmosphere if we're doing it in the afternoon. We can have some libations and more music. And but thanks for tuning in. Again, if you like what we're doing, please spread the word. And also, where is the chat? Okay. Yeah, and again, spread the word, tell your friends, tell your family, and also consider making a donation to our patreon.com/Etienne Lebel or paypal.me /Etienne Lebel. That'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.